Well, believe it or not, in a week and a half, we will be celebrating Lent. A week and a half, it'll be Ash Wednesday. And of course, for us who are kind of involved in priesthood and in ministry and stuff like this, we're always thinking ahead toward these times. And I'm reflecting back on my own approach to Lent from years ago, which was always kind of a terrible experience because I never looked forward to Lent because it always meant giving up something. And how can I endure 40 days without candy? Or how can I do this without, pop or soda, or what you want to say? It was always, in my past, it was always about what are we giving up? Well, I think today, if we hear these readings, we may have a different approach to that. Because what Lent is about preparing ourselves to be ultimately what we are. People of resurrection, people of hope, people of new life. And a lot of times I think during Lent we get kind of distracted and this becomes like an endurance test for us of how long we can give up these things. And then we sit around and we suffer because, I'm longing for this chocolate I've given up. Or, on Friday I'm longing for meat. Actually, I enjoy fish greatly and usually choose fish, so for me it's not a big sacrifice. But I believe if we have that as our goal of recognizing that we are going to be celebrating at Easter who we really are, people of Easter, it'll help us to frame what Lent is about. And I believe maybe if all of us would take that second reading, which was read very beautifully, by the way, today, proclaimed very beautifully, of that reading of Paul, which apparently, Deacon Jack told me, is at the end of the 12th chapter into the 13th chapter of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, which in a couple chapters he's going to be speaking about resurrection. And so I think in his mind, he is already seeing how this reading we had today about love connects up with resurrection. Love is, as I said in the beginning of Mass, love, we hear this reading quite often in weddings, and we're in this everyone's in this kind of blissful state. And they read these readings and think, oh, this is pretty easy to do on that day of the wedding. But day one of that marriage, what happens? What happens after a year? What happens after 2 years? What happens after 40 years? What happens after 60 years? And a lot of times what I hear in the confessional quite often is that, all of that things that Paul was talking about, we're not really doing. And what Paul's really talking about is of doing those acts of compassion. Compassio, as it is in Latin. Compassio means suffering with. If we really love someone, and I think this is really the test of love, we know how they suffer. In that knowledge we have the power either to destroy that person because we know how they suffer, or we can support that person in their suffering. It means that I am with them. And this is a great pain of life. And I think the reason why we abandon a lot of people is we don't want to suffer with them anymore. I have a good friend of mine she's 41, she's going through a divorce now. Her husband, after 20 years of marriage, decides he's had enough of, as he says in his life, it's job stress, it's wife stress, and it's children's stress. They have 3 children. And so what is he giving up? He's not giving up his job stress. He's giving up his family, basically, because he's not going to live there anymore, and he's giving up his wife. And I'm wondering, on that day of the wedding, maybe they had this same reading. What happened to that? And I'm not blaming Jessica's husband. In fact, I can understand that because in a lot of ways I fail to do that with friends myself who are suffering. I separate myself because I don't want to feel that. I don't want to suffer myself because a friend of mine is suffering. I run away from it. But I believe this is the test of true love. I have a friend of mine, another friend of mine, who has this abandonment issue. I mean, she reads everything as if it's abandonment of her because her family basically emotionally abandoned her when she was a small child. And so she lives out this constantly. Well, you know, I, as a friend, in fact, not as a friend, I could really go after her. I could really make her suffer more. But my choice is in compassion, is to be with her in that suffering and to protect her, to hold her up. So when she starts to talk this language of abandonment, I am there to hold her up. And say, yes, you may feel like you're being abandoned, but you have a community around you and so forth. This is what we do when we love. This is what I think Paul is talking about. And it means, compassion means, what Paul's talking about here is tough love. This is not easy. And as I said at the beginning of liturgy, all of us fail in this. But we can fail and kind of walk away, or we can kind of regroup and once again join with one another in that act of compassion. So I'm going to suggest to you is as you prepare yourselves for the celebration of Lent, to celebrate Lent as a preparation for Easter, that maybe we should look at those people around us that we know are really suffering. And maybe spend time with them, to be with them, and uphold them in that suffering. Maybe this is a time in which, in the act of compassion, it is to seek out those people we know we have hurt. I think this is what Lent is about. It's a time of basically a preparation, as Paul says. It's preparation because we are now in this, where we're experiencing partially is what we're going to experience in its fullness. Meaning that Christ has come and revealed the fullness of love. And we can experience that partially, I believe, by being disciples of Him, by doing those acts of compassion, of suffering with those people around us. And then it includes spouses. This includes family members. This means neighbors. This means friends, and ultimately this also means enemies. That we are to do those acts of compassion for those people. So let us do that. Let us do during Lent those acts of compassion. It's not to say you don't, have a meatless Friday and maybe you want to give up chocolate or alcohol or pop or whatever you want to do, but I think what's more important is to be these persons of compassion. Because I think in that way, if we really do that, we will be able to celebrate Easter in a new and more exciting way. To know that what we celebrate during that time of Easter is new life, of a reconnection with all of reality, of experiencing that new creation that the resurrection brings us. And in that time, we will prepare ourselves, this act of compassion, because we will now join with the risen Christ in proclaiming that we are truly people of new life. We are people of Easter. We are people of the resurrection.